Right, so that's enough talking about it. Let's head on over to our Visual Studio Code so we can start implementing the configuration for Docker Compose. Before we begin setting up Docker Compose, just a note from my side, I've gone ahead and cleared out all the images and containers from previous builds in the previous modules. So if I do a Docker images here, you'll see that there are no images listed here. And if I do a docker ps-all, you'll see I've got no container. So that's how where I'm at the moment. You can go ahead and kind of clear it out on your own if you need to, just to avoid any complications down the line. Next step, you can go ahead and head on over to your docker-compose.yaml file. This is a file that we created way back in our first initial setup of our project. We said that we'll come back to it, and now we are going to be doing the work to set this up. So the Docker Compose file is a YAML file, which uses standard YAML to set up our configuration. So it kind of follows a key value pair with indentation in your file that will kind of allow you to nest under certain headings or certain keys that you're using. So I'm just going to go ahead and start writing out this compose file. I'll talk you through it a bit as we go, but we'll also at the end just take one deeper dive into each specific line in this file that we create. The first key here that we're going to have is a version, and we're just going to specify 3.8. At the time of this recording, it's the closest version of Docker Compose that matches to the version of Docker that I'm running. And the next key here that will be on the same line as version will be services. And this is going to be kind of like a nested setup here where each service will be a key. So the first service and the only service that we're running is our API. So I'm just going to go ahead and name this API. And then under the API level, then we can start listing out some configuration for our API. The first one that we can use is this container name. And we're just going to name it API like we have been doing. And the next key here is the build key. And this is just going to specify where the location of our folder is, where the Docker file is kind of residing. So as you can remember, the Docker file in our API lives on the API level here. So we can just say /API, and then it will know to look for a Docker file within that folder. And I'm going to add a key here, which says restart. And I'm going to give it a value of always. I can explain this in a little bit more depth later, but for now, just understand this is a flag that we just telling the Docker engine that if for any reason the API container exits with the container 0, it should just restart it because the service should always be up and running. The next key that we can use is this port key, and so I'm going to use a dash here, and in strings I'm going to say 3000. And 3000. And so if you remember in our Docker command with the -p flag, the host container always goes first. So we're looking for port 3000 on our local machine, and we're going to map that to port 3000 within our Docker container. And the last thing that we need to set up is the volumes. The same way that we did with our Docker command, we just need to recreate this. So the way our volumes is set up is we want to make a reference to the API folder. Then we want to map that to the user source/app, which is the working directory in our Docker container. And remember, that would be specified in the Docker file here. And so that relates to this working directory. And I'm going to go ahead and save our work here. With that, all of our configuration is set up for this container. And so if you think of it in one way, it's just like breaking up that long Docker command that we've been using, which would be this one over here. We've kind of like broken it up into a easier to read YAML format. You can see the ports are specified here, the volumes are specified. We've got our name, where the Docker file is, and then we can start adding additional flags or configuration in our services. So once we have that YAML file set up, we can go ahead and test this straight away. In all previous lessons, we've been working within the API folder. And now that we've set up Docker Compose, and this is an important step, so make sure that you do it, you just need to change directory to go back one level so that you're in the node Docker Mongo or whatever you've named your project. And so just make sure that if you do an ls, you can see the Docker Compose.yaml file is there. Just to show you what would happen if you, in the root of your actual project where the Docker Compose file lives, you can say Docker Compose up. And if I hit enter here, it's going to set up our Docker environment the way that we want it configured. So once I've hit enter there, it's going to take a while for this to be set up. And you can see it's going to go through the same steps as when we build the image and then run the container. And you can see the output of this Docker Compose up command. There's some additional here where it's created a default network, and it's gone ahead and done that for us already. And then we've got our container API, which is up and running. It's attached that container API to the network, and our API is up and running here. So we go ahead and test this out on our local host. We'll do localhost 3000/ping. And you'll see that everything is working correctly with our Docker Compose up command. With this configuration that we set up, we just need this one command and then everything is up and running. And if we want to stop the server for whatever reason, we can just say Control-C. We can just say Control-C in our terminal, and then it's going to go ahead and gracefully stop your container for whatever reason that you wanted to do that. And then once that's exited, that container has now exited and is cancelled. So if I do a Docker images, you'll see that there's that Docker images with the latest tag. We'll do a Docker ps-a, and then you'll see that we have the node Docker Mongo API, which was running a few seconds ago, and then API names there. So it's like everything that we were doing with our previous Docker commands is now being accomplished through this Docker Compose file. So there's one quick thing that I wanted to show you here is just to reiterate the ports on our computer. Let's say that we change the port that we're mapping, so we want all traffic from localhost 3009 to map to our Docker container. We can just go ahead and change that in our Docker Compose file. We can just use that Docker Compose up to rerun our container, and you'll see that it's been recreated. And then our Docker container API here is listening on port 3000. So if we go ahead and try and hit that localhost 3000/ping, you'll see that we can't reach it because we've changed the mapping. So if we wanted to change the mapping on our local host here to 3009, and now if we hit enter, we'll get a success because we've just changed the configuration slightly so that it's a different port. But by convention, normally we just kind of use the same port number, even though sometimes as a beginner it's a bit confusing, but it makes a lot of sense just to keep it the same. But for whatever reason, if you wanted to change that, you can see how quick and easy it is to do that using Docker Compose. Right, so that concludes this module on Docker Compose, as well as an important checkpoint in our API setup here. We've kind of finished all the Docker configuration that we've needed to do, and we've covered some theory behind it, some deeper understanding. And so in the next module, we'll be moving on to a new topic, which would be setting up MongoDB. And now that we've got all the foundations laid for Docker, it's going to be a lot easier to set this up in its own container. And then we can start looking into some more of the nuances and the topics related to MongoDB. So looking forward to working through that with you in the next module. I'll see you on over there. Cheers for now.